This is June 27, 2007 at 3:15 in the afternoon. We are interviewing Helen Fitzgerald in Albany, New York. She served in the WAves, a branch of the United States Navy, also known as the Women's Auxiliary Volunteer Emergency Service. She served from August 4, 1944 to August 4, 1946. June and Kenneth Hunter are the interviewers. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
My full name that I use now is Helen Wallace Fitzgerald. It takes in both marriages that way. My maiden name is Helen Hines, H-I-N-E-S. I was born in Auburn, Washington in 1924.
What did you do before you entered the WAves?
Well, I had a very typical life before I went to school. I graduated from high school, did summer jobs, that sort of thing. I was in a rather farming community, small in central Washington in the Yakima Valley. I went to a small college about 60 miles from my hometown, Central Washington College of Education, and planned to be a teacher. I went 3 years there, and then when I became 20 years old, I was old enough to join the Navy, and I did.
And what made you make that decision?
Well, it's hard to say. One thing, I think one of my friends had joined not too long before and had come around visiting, and we all tried on her hat and admired her uniform, and that might have got me thinking about joining the Navy. But I was, I guess I was willing to take a risk in a sense, to go and try something new. Even getting into the Navy, they had no naval installation around Ellensburg, where the college was, so I had to travel to Spokane, which was a long bus trip to have a physical, and I did that in, I would say, April or May, and then I had to wait out the time until I was old enough. My birthday was July 12th, and at that time, then I was sworn in and just waiting for orders to go.
And then where did you go from that point?
Well, at that time, I was included with a group of waves from the Northwest, from Portland, Seattle, Tacoma, that area. They started to train in Portland, and they picked up the women along the way. I got on in Pasco, Washington, and then they went to Spokane, and then we came directly to Hunter College in the East, in New York City. And of course, it was my first time East. I had been up and down the West Coast, but I was thrilled about going to see it. The East is so special when you're a Westerner, because everything that you ever read about in the papers or hear on the radio seems to be either Los Angeles or New York. And so I was thrilled about coming and seeing the things I'd read about and heard about.
How did you get from the West Coast to the East Coast? By train? By bus? Or?
We came by train. We all had bunks, and we were, it was like a 3-day trip. And the reception there at Hunter College was interesting because I didn't have any idea what to expect. You think about Navy barracks and so on, but the Navy had commandeered some apartment buildings in near Hunter and in the Bronx, and there we were crowded. Of course, I think there were 4 maybe girls to a room, but it was a fancy apartment. It had a step down kind of a sunken living room, and it probably was a high rent district, I would guess. But that's where we did our training, or where we did our living. But Hunter College buildings is where the training was. And we went to classes and drilled and did a lot of things which you do in boot camp.
Can you recall when you got there, did you undergo physical examinations, an outfitting of clothing? What was that like?
It was very interesting, and as I said, I had refreshed my memory in reading some old letters, so I'm very, remember what we did. We had to go, it was 2 weeks actually before we got our uniforms. We had to go and get fitted, and we were issued like 2 blues, which were the navy blue jacket and skirt, and then summer uniforms were seersucker, white and gray striped dress, and then a jacket that went over the dress. And then you had two brims, they were, of hats, because you had cap covers in white for summer, and in seersucker you had them, and then in navy blue for the winter months, and it was determined by what time of year and where you were, what kind of uniform you wore. They did not issue any of the dress whites, but I got those later on my own.
What was a typical training day like? When did you rise? When did you go to bed? What were meals like?
We had cafeteria style dining rooms, and our rising was about 6:30 in the morning, if I recall. The thing that I remember most about it, it was so hot. It was August, and in the east, in the part of Washington that I had lived in the West Coast in general, cools down. When the sun goes down, it's cool at night. So I'd always used to sleeping under blankets, and I couldn't get over how hot it was. You couldn't even have a sheet on. And while I was there, a hurricane came through, and that was kind of exciting. I'd never lived through a hurricane before. We did not go out in it, of course, but we marched. They had underground tunnels and things for the classes or the schools, and I remember we were all marched through and told to go home and stay away from the windows and that sort of thing. But we had classes in things like the preparations for wartime, kind of like what the civilians were doing, identifying planes by their silhouettes, that sort of thing. And then we had drill, and that was kind of an inspiring thing to do it maybe in 90 degrees, sometimes warmer in the heat and humidity. And as I recall, you had to stand at attention, and you stood there, and every so often you'd hear plop. Somebody would faint, and then you'd hear this scurrying. There would come the corpsman with a stretcher. They'd drag you off. That happened several times. So it was not rigorous, but it was. It depended on your condition. Most people that were in the boot camp were young women. I would say I was just 20. I would say there were very few that were maybe over 25.
Now, what sort of classes did you take in your training?
Well, you did a lot of testing. They gave you aptitude tests, and then they informed you what you were eligible to do or what you could handle and so on. And I was told that I could be a link trainer, or I could be an aerographer, or a yeoman, or whatever. So I chose to be an aerographer, which is the term the Navy has for meteorology. It's a weather person. And aerographers are normally on airfields or on ships. They take weather observations and do that type of work. But we didn't know whether we could do it until they told you that you've been chosen. And the school for aerography was in New Jersey. And so we were waiting and seeing the letters posted on the bulletin boards if you were in or not. And if you hadn't been assigned by the end of your 6 weeks of boot camp, then you were sometimes put into what they called OGU, which was outgoing unit. And I was, because they weren't ready for me at the aerographer school yet. And it was interesting because my job, I was at the office of the day. That was where I went every morning, and I had to ring the bell every half hour. I'd go out, and like every half hour you'd ring so many times, you know. And so that was my biggest duty, and then log in and out visitors. So it was kind of interesting kind of work for me to do, and wait. And of course, during that time, we had liberty, and for a young woman who'd never been to New York, that was exciting as it could be. We saw some plays, and I managed to go to the museum sometimes, and it was very heady stuff at that time. Of course, we didn't have much money.
Can you recall what a typical payday was like back in those days?
$21 was what I started out with.
All of $21?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
2 weeks at $21. And then as she went up. I was not eligible to go to officer school because I was very nearsighted. And they had two requirements. You had to have 4.0 vision, or you had to have college education. You could have one or the other. I mean, you couldn't accept both of them. So I wasn't fully through college, and I had the bad eyes too, so that knocked me out of that. But I went up the ranks from seaman first class, first year seaman first class, seaman second class, third class, and then when you get into the after training and when I was into actually serving, then I went up to aerographer's mate first class.
What was the aerography training like? What were some of the things that you had to become familiar with?
Very interesting. It was intensive study. There were people from the fleet, a lot of men. It was wonderful because we didn't have any men back in school after the Pearl Harbor, and so there were like 300 fellows, and there were 45 waves in this class. And they call it the Newman School. It was had taken over. It was an old Catholic boys' school right down in the pine woods outside of Lakehurst, and we went to school all day long. We had to learn about codes. Everything that has to do with weather is based on the weather codes. You remember what teletype is? Little groups of 5 letters, 5 numbers. Like so, the first 3 numbers would be the station's call letters. The third number was maybe the cloud covers, and the fifth, whatever it is. Each one had a meaning, so that where it was always wind speed or barometric pressure, whatever it was. You had to learn all this, and then you had to practice being able to, we had to enter maps. That's how they did it then. They didn't have TV. So you had a big map, and one person would read the things, and they would read from the thing what it was, and then you would enter it on the map. It would be, each station you're supposed to put it in something no larger than a dime. So you had to put all these things, numbers around, so anybody who was reading the map could tell exactly what the weather conditions were. And that's how they did weather. They drew the fronts and all that kind of thing. They did from all this information. So that was the memorization was the biggest thing. We learned a lot.
When you went through that training, what was your reaction? Were you petrified or so on various progress points that you had to meet?
Yes. We had tests every week, and if you didn't make a certain grade, then you would get some demerits. You'd have to work off by doing cleaning or something like that. So it was very strenuous. But then we also had activities we were through, like in the evening, late afternoon, evening. They had tennis courts, and it was like a private boys' school. They had everything there that you would want to do. And they had dances, and we could go on weekend. We'd have a 48-hour pass. I remember going into New York, which was only like a 30-mile trip, or over to Lakewood. So there was a lot of fun in it too. And the girls that I was with were all very much like I had grown up with. They were college trained, very nice, and I had no problem with anybody. And enjoyed it. We always were under pressure, to learn. And when we were through that, the boys all went out to air stations, went out to ships, and the girls were all sent to Washington, D.C.
Did you find any prejudice towards being a woman with all these men going through the schools?
No, we just loved it. No, because there weren't very many girls there. I mean, if you wanted a date, you could have as many dates as you wanted. They were very careful about. We had strict barracks, and again, they were nice dorms. They weren't barracks as such. But you had to be in a certain time, and so they took care of us that way. But we were free to go out on our own on weekends. But it was, no, the boys, all the boys that I knew there, I don't think I ever met anyone that wasn't, I call a nice boy, and certainly a nice girl. They were all great.
What were the officer mix-up that you had there? Did you have men and women officers at training? How were they?
We had, at the training school, in boot camp, we had women officers, all. In the training school, we had all men officers. And I can't think of any other woman. I had some pictures of the class, and I can't see any woman who was an officer then. But I mentioned going to Washington, D.C. The reason that everybody was sent there was because they had this big communications center at Ward Circle in Washington, D.C. And they had this huge wave quarters, 5,000 waves. It was the biggest wave quarters in the country. And our sole purpose, aerographers, were to help find meaning in these little 5-word or 5-number things in the Japanese weather code, because we knew what was a lot likely combinations. And so we sat all day, every day, looking at the teletypes from the messages from the Japanese. It was very important because we had no information from the West out in the Pacific, and that's the way the weather moved. So it was very important to get that information. So that's what we did, and it was we were, told on pain of death that never tell anybody about this. It's a top secret. But I talked about it. 50 years later, I don't think anybody cares. It was we used to have burn bags. You couldn't throw any paper away. You'd have to go down and burn it at night. It was very, very strict and secretive.
How would going back just a little bit to basic training? Today we have the vision of what a drill instructor was like. They're real nasty and mean. How were the women drill instructors or female?
They were very nice. I can't think of any negative things about boot camp, actually, other than it was very hot there. But it was a very good experience for me, the whole thing. And the training school, again, it was intensive training, but it wasn't unpleasant.
Now, did you have any opportunity to use your training for flight operations in the Lakehurst area?
Not in Washington. We went to Lakehurst and we saw all the balloons and all, because that was our official closest business or office type thing. And we would go there for, we had a dental appointment or something, that's where you went to Lakehurst. But we had nothing at that time that we did other than learn how to do it. We learned how to take weather observations by machine and observing and all that. When we got to Washington, the exciting time that I spent in Washington was because of the timing it was. It was when the war was getting over and everybody was hyped up in the news, and we had parades when Eisenhower came back from on V-Day, and then on VJ Day I was there and saw the big parades, and when the war was over it was like madness. Everybody in Washington D.C. was amazing.
And they were very happy and...
Oh, happy, yes.
And you probably haven't seen anything quite like it since.
No, I don't think there was never a time that I don't think that the whole nation was ever so behind, so focused on the war. Everybody was involved in some way with the war, rationing or volunteer work or whatever. But everybody was of one mind. There were no anti-war at that time. There were later, but not then. Everything was one way. You always felt that you were well supported.
And that makes a big difference.
Yes.
Now, how long were you in Washington?
I was there from January until October of '45. And then after the war ended, we were liberated from the Washington, D.C. scene, and so all of the girls who had been captive there, we were all sent out to different airfields, and they started a big train in Washington, and we all got on it. They dropped some in Jacksonville, dropped some in Pensacola. And I remember I was going to Corpus Christi, and We stayed in New Orleans for a day, and that was an experience. All you ever read about New Orleans. I remember we all had lunch at Antoine's for like $3 a person, which was amazing. But then when we got to Corpus Christi, then we began doing the kind of thing that we had learned in training school. We were actually in the Navy then, and we'd been spoiled in Washington because it was ladies' lunch. You'd have chicken salad and stuff. And then we started eating Navy food, you know, beans for breakfast and stuff. It was different. But
well, tell us some of those, how it differed.
Yes, well, it was different because we were, there were a lot of waves, and we were used to being a little bit exclusive, I have to admit it, because we were always together. And we were working shifts, you know, like midnight to 8 in the morning, and then daytime and so on. And so those kinds of things set us apart a little bit. When we got to Corpus Christi, we were in the general barracks with all the waves. And there were a lot of waves who were not like the aerographers' mates. You know, there were a lot of girls who were in, and I'm not saying anything negative about them, but they were different kind of girls, you know. And so we still tried to keep sort of clannish, but it was a little more difficult then, that was all. But it was, in a professional sense, we were always with the same people. So I've had lifelong friends, you know, from that experience. I just talked to one yesterday that I went through those years with. And after I read my letters, I thought, oh, I've got to talk to you.
So you've gotten together like a reunion?
We have had once or twice, but the people are so scattered that some people have some friends, and so you don't have too many that everybody knows about. I would say that in Corpus Christi that I had this one, like a buddy, that I spent most of my time with because we had the same shifts. And there were other girls who had been through the whole experience, so we all got together in Washington. We would have bike hikes and go down to the tidal basin and that sort of thing. But after we got out to the airfields, we didn't see the ones who went to California or ones who stayed in Florida. We would have little get-togethers with our own group in Corpus Christi. It was fun.
Now, did you have any funny experiences?
Oh, well, yes, I think there are a lot of funny experiences. The one that I think I mentioned on the paper, I thought was hilarious because we were all very anxious to fly because that meant you got more money. You know, you get flight skins. And so anybody who had flight skins would get like $100 a month. And that's a lot of money, you know. And they would give you more on retirement, or when you're enlisted, they give you a bonus and all. So we all wanted to have flight skins. In order to get those, you had to go outside of the continental U.S., and there was a weather flight, a weather hawk that took off every day, and a PBY, and the weather person from our office, the aerology office, would go down there, and we would get on board the plane, and we would take observations of the currents in the seas, and you could tell by the waves how much the wind was. We'd take the pressure and all these things, and that was the purpose of the flight, was to get the weather observations. They would go out 4 hours, 2 hours, and back, but they went outside the continental. So that was the part that made it a very popular flight, because there were tons of officers who had flight skins, but they didn't have access to planes anymore. They were sitting at desks, so they would come down to get on that flight, and they would line up to get on that flight, and especially toward the end of the month, you had to get it in. So this one time, we had a young fellow from the fleet, and he had gone down for the day for the flight, and he came back, and he said, well, what's the matter? And he said, well, they didn't have room for me. And we thought that was the funniest thing in the world. The weather flight did not have room for the weatherman, see? That was the only time I heard that.
Now, for the person that's uninitiated, the PBY was nicknamed the Catalina.
Yes.
And
a seaplane.
It was a seaplane.
Yeah.
Now, did you take off from land on it and land at sea on it, and then take off from sea? Did you have that experience?
We took off from land. I don't remember ever going near the water to get on the plane, no. But we also flew in another plane, SNJ, you know what that's, a training plane?
A training plane.
And every day they would have a weather hawk that would go up like this over the thing up to 20,000 feet. And they had an instrument strapped to the wing of the plane that would take all these tracings on there. And so you have to put oxygen on and all. It's quite exciting. And then you come down again. And then you'd have to take the thing and go back to the office and work up the information for the people who were actually in the aerology office, the weather office, the officers did the actual diagnosing, I should say, or reading the maps. That took a little more training, and that's when they would put in the isobars and things like that, you know, connecting equal pressure points. That's how, you know, weather maps have these lines that go around like that, fronts and so on. So that's,
Can you remember your first flight? Because I think most people say the first flight was the most thrilling and it's never the same again.
well, it was a little boring. When I first did it, there was a little bit of flurry because I thought the plane was on fire. That's what I thought. And there was a lot of scurrying around. I don't know yet whether there was something, but it seemed to me that something was obviously wrong. But we went up. And then all you do is you just go up and up, and there's nothing to do. It's interesting to see it and do it once, but if you do it a lot, we didn't do it that often. We didn't do it every day by any means. They passed it around to the different ones. But yeah, when you get used to things, it was kind of boring. 4 hours out on the plane.
And you don't have that much scenery.
The fun of the flying, though, was taking hops on leaves, because that was where you had to, we'd go down to operations and see if anyone was going to San Diego or going to Los Angeles or wherever, and if you were lucky, you could catch a hop. So I remember the first leave I went home, and that was a long way. I got a hop to, I think, Tucson or something, and then to San Diego, and then up. And I had been told I had to have a parachute with me in case I got in small planes. So I had this parachute, and I carried it with me and carried it all the way home. And I got home, and I put it on we had a glassed in porch, eating porch sort of. So I just put the thing there. And somebody came to see me, I don't know whether it was a family member or something, but I can't recall who did it. But I said, that was a parachute. And said, well, this is it. And they took it by the red hem, poof, it opened up. And I was terrified that I was going to get in trouble with that. We stuffed it back in. And I was just absolutely terrified. And I did have to have them. I did fly my last leg. I flew a small plane. And we'd go in Marine planes, Navy planes, Army, whatever there was. And wherever you landed, all you had to do was find the women's quarters. Waves or the Marine women or the blacks, and so we always had no problem that way. But I can remember that parachute.
Well, so you made it back just carrying the parachute?
Well, I carried it in the bag like it was packed. You know, and this is something that you get varying. Sometimes people will tell you, and I think it's true, that they have parachute packers and stuff, and they string them out, and they have to be all just right. And then I've had people tell me, just stuff them in there a little open. So I didn't know. I was not sure which it was going to be.
So then when you got back with it, did you have to report to somebody?
Oh, I just took it back and said, you know, it's used. Not that I used it. But it's, no, that was the exciting part, I can remember, right? And going down and not knowing where you're going to be, and what flight you're going to go on. Sometimes.
That's the enjoyment of being a young person.
Yes, that's right, exactly so. And the idea when you took hops, you had to make sure that you had enough time at the end that if you didn't get a hop, you had enough time to get back by bus or train. So that put a little bit of a limit on going out. You know, you could afford to wait here and there. Sometimes you didn't wait all day and didn't get a ride.
Now, on the basis you were on, you mentioned earlier in the Washington, D.C. area that you had the opportunity to go to USO facilities and so forth. What was the general scene? What was it like at a USO facility? A lot of people know that Bob Hope was behind the support of it. Did you see any celebrities at any of these?
The only ones that I can remember actually seeing really big celebrities, Gary Cooper came when I was in boot camp at one time, and Frank Sinatra when I was in Corpus Christi. That was a madhouse. You know, he was very popular at the very beginning, and everybody, they had a big hangar, and they had people standing on the wings of the planes and stuff. It was amazing. But other than that, I saw a lot of New York shows. When I was in Washington, I went up to New York, and I saw, you know, a lot of really first-rate shows because we could go in and get standing room only. So I saw stars that way.
You didn't have to pay, or was it?
Oh no, we paid. But you know, it's amazing the difference. Like I say, you could get the hotel tab $3 a night. Sometimes you would have to go for $6 a night. That's for a hotel. You know, that's not bad.
By today's standard, perhaps. Maybe
Well,
back.
I remember I worked later for the university here, and we used to stay at the Taft, and it was like state's rates were $38, I think. That was back in the 70s.
Now, do you recall back that period on food, when you had a liberty in a city or so forth? Was food scarce in restaurants or so, or?
Washington, D.C. was full of people. The restaurants there was no austerity there at all. I mean, you got word from the home front, my folks would rationing, but I didn't notice that at all. And of course, that was the only place that I really did see a lot of things. I mean, we went to, Washington was a wonderful place to be because they had a lot of free concerts, the Marine Band and the Navy Band and the Smithsonian, all these things you could see. It was absolutely great for anybody who was interested in art or that kind of.
Now, are there people that you ever, I know you mentioned earlier you haven't really had a reunion, are there?
No, but the biggest effect on my life was I met my future husband when I was in Corpus Christi. He was a cadet in the aviation program, and so I met him in that last summer that I was in the service. And then I wrote to him. He went to finish his training in Pensacola, and I went back to college and got my degree, and so he came up to see me at Christmas time. Long bus trip all the way from Pensacola to Seattle. Anyway, so yes, and he was from Michigan. I would never have met anybody from Michigan. So that, I think that one of the results of World War II was like a fruit basket upset, because this happened innumerable times. Men would meet local girls, and everybody was changed. You used to be born and raised and live within a 50-mile radius and no more. And that really changed things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, holidays away from home, the services were known for special meals they put on days like Halloween, on Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. Can you remember, were they regular feasts or?
Well, they always had like turkey dinners, you know, that's what I remember. Often for the Christmas when I was in New Jersey, I went home with a girl from down the river, Rhinebeck. She was a special friend because I had been with her since boot camp, and she asked me there, so that I spent Christmas that year. Then the next Christmas, I think I went home on leave, so I can't really tell you too much, but I do remember Thanksgiving having a lot of turkey, regular turkey dinners and things. And we used to have, everybody had food sent to them. The girls would have little buffets, you know, they'd put the ironing board up, lay the stuff out.
So you shared everything?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember that was a very popular time, mail call. Everybody gathered together to see what special treat somebody was getting.
Right.
And you were right, people were very sharing.
And I can remember the letters that I wrote home. I love the cookies. Everybody liked cookies. So that's that's why I'm baking cookies here as a volunteer. I guess I'm a cookie lady.
What kind of cookies were most popular? Do you recall?
Well, of course, the ones that were sent, it was difficult because they had to travel well. So they're probably oatmeal cookies and hard ones.
Fruit cake?
Oh, fruitcake. Yes, fruitcake was a good traveler. Yeah.
That's probably why many people don't like fruit
That's
cake
very
today, although
true.
we
Very
enjoy
true.
it. Now, when you left the service, tell us
Tell us what
how
the
your
process was
discharge
like.
was.
Well, it was interesting there because we had joined for the duration of the war. And so when the war was over, prior to that, we had been given this option of signing on for another 5 months. And that kind of was in that ending of the war. I think it was like May, and it was like to September, say. And the war ended in August, or I think it was in the summertime, and September perhaps. So we had, at that time in Corpus Christi, they were discharging people by point system. When you had so many points by how long you'd been in, then as you reach that point, then out you go. So my group of people I worked with were coming like every 2 weeks, some more would leave. And that was kind of amusing. And we all wanted to go to Mexico City from Corpus Christi. And one of the girls who had been discharged in June had gone down there and just loved it. So she went back down to the university for the summer session. So she wanted us all to come down. So there were about 8, I think, waves, but most of them were being discharged earlier. Another girl and I had to wait until our point system came up. So we had 2 weeks to wait before that we could go for them, I guess. Anyway, we had 2 weeks to spare, and we took a trip to Florida. We were out of the Navy, understandably. We had been discharged. We had false leave papers. We wore our uniforms, and we got Hawks and went to Florida. And we hopped from one place to the other, and then we got a plane in Pensacola going to Corpus Christi. And it happened to be a visiting admiral, and it was a small plane and very plush, you know. And we were so scared that somebody would ask us to see our papers or something. We wanted to sneak into Corpus. So when we got there, they had the band out. It's like, I can't believe how many people were there. And they had moved the dormitories while we were gone, and we couldn't find the women we were supposed to go with. They had left. Oh, it was a big mess. So they had rented a car for us to go to Mexico City, and we ended up, this other girl and I, we had to go by bus because they'd already gone on ahead. So we went by bus. It was like $23 or something to go to Mexico City. But we were all there for 10 days. It was fabulous.
So then...
Then I came home,
yeah.
visited parents, or visited aunts and uncles and so on, and stopped in California and saw one of my good wave friends.
Mm-hmm.
Several of the fellows who'd been in Corpus were out then. I remember we all got together. That was in the fall of '46. And by the time I went back to school.
Now, did you return to the school, the
Same
college
school.
you'd started
I
out in?
had thoughts of going. I sent in some information to Stanford. I wanted to go to Stanford, but I don't know what happened. I just went back and finished, and then I got my degree. And then my husband-to-be at that time, he had gotten his wings, but he wasn't eligible for a leave, so I had to go down to Pensacola to get married. So I got on the train, went to Chicago. I actually went to Chicago and went to a wedding of my best friend, who I talked to yesterday. She was just outside of Chicago, and then I went down, and we were married, and then went into the Navy. He was in the Navy for 2 years after that, so he was a flyer. He flew PB-4 Y2s, and so that was interesting too.
Now, what did you take in college? What is your degree in?
Well, it was a teaching certificate kind of a thing, like most states have a teacher's college, they used to call them normal schools, kind of. I majored in art, I think, and well, education. My degree was an education degree for teaching, but I never really liked it. I tried it once and never liked it. When we were in Norfolk, while my husband was on duty there, I had already discovered I didn't want to teach. I mean, I didn't like the idea. And so I went to business college for a year. And so I came out. And so when he got out of the Navy, then I was ready to, I worked as a private secretary for a couple of years while he was finishing. And he loved the West, so he came out West. And he went to the university in Seattle.
Now, was your training on, did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Oh, yes.
What was the college scene like?
It was very interesting because the people, I had started in school in the fall of 41, so I knew a lot of people who were like freshmen, sophomores, juniors in that period, and all of a sudden, after Pearl Harbor, they just vanished. You couldn't find a boy on campus. There were 4 F'ers left on campus. It was a small school, about 400 people maybe. But after, everybody came back, and it was wonderful. Everybody, I took flying lessons, and I took lessons from fellows I had known who had been in the Marine Air Corps flying, and it was fun. You know, we had, I think it was about $100 or $125 a month that they gave us, and all our books and tuition and that sort of thing.
How did you find the reception at the college there, being an older person with experience in life, being in the service and so forth, and seeing youngsters right out of high school coming?
Different, yeah. It was a different group, sort of. You know, they had their group, and then the older ones, and especially a lot of the returning vets were married, and so they had a married village that all the married ones lived in. So it was, yeah, it was different in that sense. But I was still only 22. So it wasn't like I was that old. I think about it now.
Looking back on it, was there anything you regretted? Would you do it over again?
Oh, I think I would. Yeah. I don't regret anything that happened during those years at all. But I think that I was very lucky in having a very positive experience. I had no problems. Nobody ever yelled at me or anything. There was never anything negative in what I was doing. And I was lucky enough again to be in part of the Navy that was respected for what they were doing and that sort of thing too. So it was very nice.
Did you ever use any of the knowledge you learned in the service in your life?
Not that much, no. I had, it was interesting because still at that time I probably could have worked in the Weather Bureau or something, but I didn't because I went right to getting married. But my friend who I said I had gone to her wedding, she married an Army fellow, and he and she went to Alaska, and he worked for the U.S. Weather Bureau because he had been in the Army, had been a weather person. Mm-hmm. So some people did do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how else has the service affected your life? I know you volunteer here at the Stratton VA Medical Center.
I've been here as a patient for nearly 15 years, I guess. 93 or 4 I started coming. And so this has been like a second home. I've been here a lot. I have a lot of things that I could watch and take pills and all that sort of thing. So I have a lot of appointments here. So a few years ago, I had done the usual retired thing of being on boards and senior centers and all that. I've done a lot of that kind of thing. And I just decided that I wanted to do something that was one-on-one. I got off about 3 boards, I guess, and said to my friend Rochelle, who's in charge of the Creative Arts Festival, I said, you know, I'd like to do something over here where I could see people and see what you do, how it affects people. It's different. And so she said, well, she was a supervisor on the board where I'm working now, which is the hospice board. So she said, well, you can come. We had a girl who baked cookies, and she had to leave. So So I'm the cookie baker now. I
Oh,
come
so-
every Wednesday.
Now, do you cook right here in this facility?
They have
or-
a kitchen right there, and that is the main thing, is because it smells so good. Everybody, you wait till their lunch is settled a little bit, and then you put it in, and oh, everybody's excited about it. Even the people who work there, it smells so good. And it's something that breaks up the day. And then I go around and talk to them. I water flowers, fill ice pitchers, and clean the refrigerator. The hospice kitchen is for hospice only, for the patients, their families, and a lot of families come. And so I actually, I know a lot of the family members now because they're long-term patients. So it's nice, and I have a little cart now. About a month or so ago, I had some trouble with my knee, so I was using a cane, and I could not handle the cookies in the cane. And so Stephanie said, well, can you use a cart? So that was about a month ago. I said, fine. So now I don't need the cane, but I'm using the cart. So I have my cookies on the top, and then I expand it a little bit. I make coffee, and I go around like a coffee wagon. And one of our patients, I just talked to her today. She's an artist, and she does a lot of painting. So we were talking about it. I said, well, why don't you paint a picture for the cookie wagon? Put it in front, so she's going to do that.
No, that should be
Fun.
very nice.
Yeah. Really fun.
So, anything else you wish to say? Or?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how time is. I haven't watched it. Are we running short?
Okay, well, this has been enjoyable, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I truly enjoyed my experience. We'll do it again.